The key turned at 6 in the morning. Eleanor knew it was 6 because she had counted. Not by a clock, there was no clock in her room, but by the light. Year after year at the same window, the same wall, the same angle of sun through the same crack in the same shutter had taught her to read time the way other women read novels, by the quality of the light, the temperature of the stone floor beneath her bare feet, and the sound the sparrows made in the ivy outside. Louder at dawn, quieter by mid-morning, silent by noon because the gardener's cat sat beneath the window ledge and the sparrows were not foolish. She was not foolish either. That was the problem. The key turned. The door opened. A woman in a gray dress and a starched cap entered with a basin of water, a cloth, and the expression of a person performing a task she had performed 2,556 times and would perform again tomorrow without variation. "Morning, Miss Hartley." "Good. Morning, Mrs. Bridle. Porridge is at 6:30. Dr. Pemberton wants you in the garden at 9. Dr. Pemberton always wants me in the garden at 9. Dr. Pemberton believes that fresh air cures moral insanity the way plasters cure boils, through the application of something external to a condition that does not exist." Mrs. Bridle set the basin on the washstand. She didn't respond to this. She had learned that responding to Eleanor Hartley's observations about Dr. Pemberton's medical philosophy only produced more observations, and Mrs. Bridle's morning didn't contain sufficient time for the full catalogue. "Garden at 9, she repeated, and left. The key turned again. Eleanor washed her face. The water was cold. It was always cold. She had stopped minding this around year 3, when the list of things she minded had grown so long that the temperature of the wash-water had been quietly removed to make room for more significant grievances. She dressed. The dress was gray, cotton, not the gray of storm clouds or old silver, the gray of institutional economy, the color you get when someone purchases fabric in bulk and does not care whether the women wearing it look like furniture. Eleanor had worn this dress, or one like it, since she was 18. She had entered Grey Hollow House in a blue muslin gown with lace at the cuffs, and she would leave, if she left, in gray cotton that smelled of lye soap and other women's sadness. She didn't know if she would leave. She had stopped planning for it around year 4, when planning had become a form of cruelty she could no longer afford to inflict on herself. She was 25 years old. She had come here at 18. The years between had been taken from her so quietly that she sometimes forgot to be angry about it, and then she remembered, and the anger was so large that it filled the room and pressed against the walls and made the sparrows go silent even without the cat. Her name was Eleanor Hartley. Her diagnosis was moral insanity. Her symptoms, as recorded in the admissions ledger of Grey Hollow House, private licensed asylum, Wiltshire, on the 14th of March, 1838, were as follows: excessive intellectual excitation, ungovernable temperament, resistance to familial authority, and persistent argumentation inconsistent with the patient's sex and station. She had argued with a man at a dinner party about whether women could reason. He had said they could not. She had said they could. She had cited evidence. She had made her case clearly, precisely, and in front of 14 people, including her mother, who had smiled through the main course and wept through the pudding and called a doctor the following morning. The doctor was Dr. Pemberton. He examined her for 11 minutes. He asked her to count backwards from 100. He asked her whether she experienced disturbances of sleep. He asked her whether she had feelings of agitation. She said yes, she experienced agitation. She was agitated that a man at dinner had claimed that women could not reason when she was standing in the room as evidence that they could. Dr. Pemberton wrote this down. Under symptoms, he recorded, patient displays marked excitability when challenged. expresses fixed ideas regarding female intellectual capacity, responds to correction with increased agitation rather than submission, recommend immediate removal to a place of supervised rest. Supervised rest, that was the phrase. Not imprisonment, not punishment. Supervised rest. As though Eleanor were a piece of machinery that had been running too fast and needed to be taken out of service until someone adjusted the gears. Her mother signed the commitment order. A single signature was all the law required. One medical certificate from one doctor, one signature from one family member, no magistrate, no hearing, no second opinion, no opportunity for Eleanor to speak, to argue, to present the evidence of her own or sanity, because the act of presenting evidence was, in itself, listed as a symptom. This was the trap. And Eleanor had understood it from the first morning she woke in this room with the shutter that let in one angle of light, and the door that locked from the outside, and the sparrows in the ivy that were, for the first 5 months, the only living things that knew she was here and didn't have an opinion about whether she should be. She went to the garden at 9. The garden at Grey Hollow House wasn't a garden in the way that Eleanor had understood gardens before she came here. Not a place of choice, not a place where someone knelt in soil and decided what to grow. It was a rectangular enclosure with a gravel path that circled a lawn, bounded by a high stone wall on 3 sides and the rear of the building on the 4th. There were benches, there were hedges, trimmed to the same uniform height, as though even the plants at Grey Hollow were expected to conform. There was a single oak tree in the far corner that had been here before the asylum was built, and that had, over the decades, grown in the only direction available to it, upward, toward the light, away from the walls. Eleanor had spent years looking at that oak and thinking, yes. The other women were already outside. There were 14 patients at Grey Hollow House, all women, all private, all paying. This wasn't a county lunatic asylum with its crowded wards and its chains. This was a licensed house for gentlewomen of means, which meant the food was adequate, the rooms were clean, the attendants did not strike, and the imprisonment was conducted with the manners of a country hotel. The cruelty at Grey Hollow wasn't physical, it was temporal. They took your time, they took your years, they took the hours in which you might have read, worked, loved, walked through a city, chosen your own dress, decided what to eat for breakfast. And they replaced all of it with gravel paths and supervised, fresh air and the sound of a key turning twice a day. Ruth was on the bench by the oak tree. Eleanor could tell by her shoulders, straightened enough today that you could see the woman she had been before the grief came. Ruth was 32. She had lost her first child, a boy, born too early, lived for 3 days, and the grief had swallowed her so completely that her husband, a wool merchant in Bristol, had signed the papers because he did not know what else to do with a wife who couldn't stop weeping. That had been 4 years ago. Ruth's grief had not gone. It had changed, settled into a low, permanent ache that flared on bad days, into something that looked, to the untrained eye, like madness, but was in fact the ordinary devastation of a woman whose body had failed to do the thing the world told her was its only purpose. Ruth was not insane. Ruth was grieving, but grief, in a woman, was treated as a malfunction, and malfunctions required repair, and repair required removal, and removal required a signature, and a signature was easy to obtain when the woman in question was too tired to fight it. "Morning," Ruth said. "Morning." Eleanor sat beside her. The gravel crunched, the oak creaked. Somewhere inside the building a woman was singing. The same 3 notes, repeated, the melody going nowhere, the voice not unpleasant but trapped in a loop it could not exit. This was Mary, who had been here longer than Eleanor, and who sang because singing was the only thing they had not taken from her, and because the 3 notes were the opening of a lullaby she had learned from her mother, and she couldn't remember the rest. "Dr. Pemberton has a visitor," Ruth said. "He always has visitors. Families checking that their inconvenient women are still conveniently stored." "Not a family, a man, official-looking. He arrived in a carriage with a crest." Eleanor looked toward the building. Through the ground-floor window of Dr. Pemberton's office, she could see 2 figures, Pemberton, round and careful, and another man, taller, standing with his back to the window, his posture suggesting authority he didn't need to perform. "Lunacy Commissioner?" Eleanor said. "How do you know?" "Because the crest means titled. A titled man visiting an asylum is either inspecting it or committing someone. If he were committing someone, he would be in the admissions office, not Pemberton's study. If he is in Pemberton's study, he is reviewing records. Commissioners review records." Ruth looked at her with the expression she always wore when Eleanor did this, the expression of a woman watching someone perform a feat that was entirely natural to the performer and entirely extraordinary to the observer. "You do that," Ruth said, "and then you wonder why they keep you here." "They keep me here because my mother is afraid of what I am. The deductions are a symptom of the condition she is afraid of. The condition is called thinking. Most people don't think out loud. Most people are not locked in a room where the only audience is sparrows." Ruth almost smiled. The almost was a victory, a small green thing pushing up through cracked ground, improbable and stubborn and worth noticing. They sat in silence. The oak threw its shadow across the gravel path. The singing continued from inside, the same 3 notes repeating. And in Pemberton's study, the man with the crest turned from the window, and for one moment, through 2 panes of glass and 30 feet of garden, Eleanor saw his face. She didn't know him. She would. Gabriel Lennox, Duke of Westmere, had seen 43 asylums in the 3 years since his appointment to the Metropolitan Commissioners in lunacy. He had joined in 1842, the year after Alice died. The old commission, before the 1845 Act, expanded it into a national body with real authority. He had seen the clean asylums, where the patients were fed and clothed and the proprietors smiled and the records were kept in leather-bound volumes with gilt edges. He had seen the other kind, the county asylums where the wards held 80 women in a room built for 30, where the smell reached you before the door opened, where the restraints left marks that the proprietors explained away as self-inflicted with the smooth confidence of men who had never been restrained. Grey Hollow House was the clean kind. Dr. Pemberton was the smiling kind. The records were in leather, the food was adequate, the patients were not chained, and the impression, for a visitor who did not look closely, was of a place that was doing its best with difficult cases. Gabriel looked closely. That was his job. That was his penance. His sister, Alice, had been committed at 19. Her husband, a baronet's son with expensive habits and limited patience, had signed the papers after Alice refused to forgive a debt he had run up using her dowry. The diagnosis was puerperal insanity, madness, following childbirth. Although Alice hadn't been pregnant and hadn't ever been pregnant, and the physician who signed the certificate had not examined her, but had been paid £30 to sign whatever the husband placed in front of him, Alice died at Haverstock House, a private asylum in Surrey, 2 years later. Typhoid fever. The conditions at Haverstock had not been the clean kind. Gabriel had not known, hadn't been told, hadn't been permitted to visit, had learned of his sister's death through a letter from the asylum's proprietor that was 3 sentences long and misspelled her name. He carried her pocket watch. It was small, silver, engraved with her initials, A.L. and it kept time imperfectly, losing 4 minutes every day, so that Gabriel's watch was always slightly behind the world's, which meant that Gabriel was always slightly late to everything, which he did not correct, because correcting it would mean admitting that Alice's watch was broken, and he was not prepared to admit that anything of Alice's was broken. The Lunacy Act of 1845 changed what he could do about it. The act required that every asylum in England be inspected, that every patient be recorded, that every commitment be reviewed. It was the first time the law had acknowledged that locking a person in a room required more than one doctor's signature and a family member's consent. It gave Gabriel's inspections teeth. It was not enough. It was a beginning. Gabriel inspected asylums the way other men hunted grouse, with precision, patience, and the understanding that what you were looking for was often hiding in the place you were not being shown. He read the admissions ledgers. He checked the dates. He looked for the patterns, single certificates, family commitments, no re-examination, no review. He looked for the women who should not be there. He also counted doors. Every room he entered, asylum, courthouse, dining room, church, he counted the exits, 2 in Pemberton's study, 1 in the common room, 3 in the garden if you included the gate and the gap where the wall met the building where a slim person could, if desperate, fit through. He had done this since Alice died. It was involuntary, the way blinking is involuntary. The inventory of a man who had learned, too late, that some rooms only open from the outside, and who could not walk into a building without mapping the way out. He found them more often than anyone wanted to believe. Dr. Pemberton's ledger was well kept. 14 patients, all women, all private. The diagnoses ranged from melancholia to religious mania to moral insanity, which was a diagnosis Gabriel had learned to read as a woman who did something her family did not like. He turned the pages. Most of the cases were straightforward: genuine illness, proper certification, regular review. And then he reached the entry for Eleanor Hartley. Admitted March 14th, 1838. Age at admission, 18. Diagnosis: moral insanity, excessive intellectual excitation, ungovernable temperament, resistance to familial authority, persistent argumentation. Committing physician, Dr. Arthur Pemberton. Committing authority, Mrs. Caroline Hartley, mother. Medical certificate, single. Re-examination, none recorded. Gabriel read it twice. He looked up at Dr. Pemberton, who was standing beside his desk with the careful smile of a man who knew what the commissioner was reading and was preparing his explanation. "Miss Hartley," Gabriel said, "a long-standing patient, admitted in 1838. She has been with us for 7 years. 7 years, under a single medical certificate, with no re-examination. Her condition has been persistent. Her condition, as described in this entry, is that she argued with someone. With respect, Your Grace, the diagnosis is more nuanced than— The diagnosis uses the word argumentation as a clinical finding. The committing physician is you. You are also the proprietor of the asylum in which she is detained. You examined her, diagnosed her, committed her, and have housed her, at her family's expense, for 7 years without a single independent review." Dr. Pemberton's smile didn't waver. This was a man who had learned that smiles were a form of architecture, load-bearing, structural, capable of holding up an entire conversation without the need for honest answers. "The family has been satisfied with her care. The family is paying you £18 a quarter to keep their daughter in a room. Satisfaction and correctness are not the same thing." Gabriel closed the ledger. He stood. "I want to see her." "She is in the garden at present. I can arrange—" "I don't need an arrangement. I need a garden. He found her on the bench by the oak tree. She was sitting beside another woman, smaller, darker, curved inward on herself, and she was talking. Not loudly, not frantically. With measured precision. She had learned that every word she spoke was recorded and used against her, and had decided, despite this, to keep speaking because silence was a form of death she was not willing to perform. She saw him before he reached the bench. She stopped mid-sentence. She looked at him with eyes that held the clarity of a person who has had years to observe the world through a single window and has sharpened her attention on that narrowness until it cuts. She was tall for a woman, 5'7", perhaps more. Thin, but not the thinness of illness. The thinness of insufficient food sustained over years. A narrowing, not a wasting. Her hair was dark auburn, long, pulled back from her face with a piece of cord, because hairpins were not permitted in the patient wards. Her face was oval, with a high forehead and a widow's peak that drew a precise line in the center of her hairline, and her skin was the pale of a woman who had not been outdoors enough, the pale that comes from stone walls and small windows and the indoor light of captivity. There was a gap between her front teeth that was visible when she spoke and that she didn't attempt to conceal, because Eleanor Hartley had spent years being told that the visible parts of herself were symptoms, and she had reached the point where concealment felt like agreement. "Miss Hartley," Gabriel said. She looked at him. She didn't stand. She didn't curtsy. She assessed him with the detached thoroughness of a woman who had been assessed by doctors and visitors and commissioners and family members and had learned to return the examination. "You've read my file," she said. "I have." "Then you know what I did. You argued with a man at dinner." "I presented a reasoned counter-argument to an unfounded claim about female intellectual capacity, supported by 3 historical examples and 1 contemporary study." The man in question responded by turning to my mother and saying, "You should have this one looked at." My mother took his advice. She found a doctor who agreed. The doctor was standing in this building when he signed the certificate. He is standing in this building now, and I have been sitting in this garden, on this bench, under this tree, for 7 years, because I was right, and the law does not require you to be wrong in order to be locked away. It only requires someone to say you are." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He had learned, in 3 years of inspections, that the patients who spoke with this kind of precision fell into 2 categories: the truly sane, who had been imprisoned by a system that couldn't distinguish intelligence from illness, and the truly ill, who had constructed a version of sanity so convincing that even experienced physicians couldn't see through it. He didn't yet know which Eleanor Hartley was. "May I sit?" he said. "The bench belongs to Dr. Pemberton. Everything here belongs to Dr. Pemberton. You may sit on Dr. Pemberton's bench, and I will sit beside you on Dr. Pemberton's bench, and we will have a conversation that Dr. Pemberton's attendant—" She gestured without looking toward the woman in gray, standing near the wall, watching. "Will record in Dr. Pemberton's ledger as evidence of my condition. The last time a commissioner visited, 3 years ago, I told him I was sane. He wrote in his report that I displayed grandiose self-assessment inconsistent with diagnosis. My claim to sanity was recorded as a symptom of my insanity. So please, sit, say what you came to say, and understand that whatever I say in response will be used to keep me here." She said all of this without raising her voice, without agitation, with controlled, exhausted clarity. She had made this speech before, to different men, in different years, and no longer expected it to work, but couldn't stop making it, because stopping would mean they had won. Gabriel sat. "I'm not here to assess you," he said. Everyone who sits on this bench is here to assess me. I'm here to review the terms of your commitment. Your case has irregularities. My case is not irregular. My case is ordinary. That is the horror of it. There are women in every private asylum in England whose cases look exactly like mine. Single certificate, family commitment, no review. I am not an exception. I am a pattern. The fact that you find my case noteworthy means you have not been looking closely enough at the others. Ruth, beside her, put a hand on Eleanor's arm. Not to restrain, to remind. Eleanor's shoulders dropped half an inch. The anger did not leave. It settled, like sediment in a glass that has been stirred. "I know that," Gabriel said. "That is why I am here." Eleanor looked at him. At the broad face, the square jaw, the sandy brown hair, the warm brown eyes that held. She was not sure what. Not pity. Pity she recognized and rejected. Something more careful. Something that looked like recognition, as though he had seen this before. Not in a file, in a person. "Who did you lose?" she said. The question landed. Gabriel did not flinch, but his hand moved, a small, involuntary motion, to his waistcoat pocket, where the watch sat. Alice's watch. 4 minutes slow. "My sister," he said. "Alice. She was committed at 19. She died at 21. Typhoid. In an asylum that was not the clean kind." Eleanor was quiet. The tree creaked. Mary's singing continued from inside. "I am sorry," she said. And she meant it, not as a social formula, but as one locked woman acknowledging another across the wall that separated the living from the dead. "What was her diagnosis?" Eleanor asked. "Puerperal insanity. She had never been pregnant." And the committing physician was paid £30. And the family member? Her husband, who remarried within 6 months. Eleanor looked at the oak tree, at the single direction it had grown, upward toward the light, away from the walls. "The system is not broken," she said. "It is working exactly as designed. It was designed to remove women. Inconvenient women, expensive women, loud women, women who argue at dinner parties, and wives who will not forgive debts, and mothers who grieve too long. The asylum is not a hospital. It is a cupboard, and we are the things that have been put away." Gabriel looked at her, at the light blue eyes that saw the architecture of the system as clearly as he did, at the thin wrists, at the years sitting behind every word she spoke. "I am going to review your case," he said, "formally, under the authority of the Lunacy Commission." "And what will that accomplish?" "Dr. Pemberton will produce his records. My mother will confirm the commitment. The single certificate will be noted as insufficient under the 1845 Act, but not retroactively invalidated because the Act does not apply to commitments made before its passage. You will write a report. The report will recommend review. The review will be conducted by a physician appointed by the Commission. And the physician will examine me, and I will answer his questions, and he will decide in 45 minutes whether 7 years of my life were justified. A man I have never met will sit across a table from me and determine whether I am a person or a diagnosis." "Yes," Gabriel said, "that is exactly what will happen." "And you believe this will work?" "I believe you will make it work, because I have been sitting on this bench for 5 minutes, and you have told me more about the asylum system than most physicians learn in a career. If the examining physician has ears and a functioning conscience, he will hear what I hear." "What do you hear?" "A woman who is not insane, who has never been insane, who has been imprisoned for the crime of being correct." Eleanor's hands, which had been folded in her lap with careful stillness, she knew that fidgeting was recorded as agitation, moved. One hand pressed flat against the wood, the fingers spread. the gesture so small that only someone watching closely would have seen it. But Gabriel was watching closely, and what he saw was a woman pressing her hand against something solid, wood, stone, earth, anything that was real, because she had just heard someone say what she had been saying for years, and she needed to touch something that would not disappear. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I will." "Bring a book." "Which book?" "Anything. I have read every page in this building, including the admissions ledger, which I accessed through a window Dr. Pemberton does not know can be opened from the inside, and which I have memorized in its entirety, and which contains, in addition to my own case, 4 other women whose commitment certificates are single signature, family authorized, and have never been reviewed." She stood. She didn't look at him. She walked back toward the building with the measured stride of a woman who wasn't free but hadn't yet been conquered, and Ruth followed, and the attendant followed Ruth, and Mary's singing continued, and the oak tree threw its shadow across where Gabriel sat and did not move for a long time. He came back the next day. He brought a book, Harriet Martineau's Society in America, which was the most intellectually aggressive thing he could find in the Salisbury bookshop, and which he chose deliberately because he wanted to see what Eleanor Hartley did with an argument she could hold in her hands. She read it in 2 days. She returned it with notes in the margins, written in pencil she had obtained from Ruth, who had obtained it from an attendant named Mrs. Gill, who believed that writing was therapeutic and who had been supplying Eleanor with pencils and paper scraps for 3 years in direct violation of Dr. Pemberton's policy because Mrs. Gill had a daughter Eleanor's age and could not look at those eyes and the thin wrists without thinking, what if it were mine? The notes were precise. They were sharp. They disagreed with Martineau on 2 points, agreed on 7, and raised 4 questions that Gabriel had not considered in his own reading of the same text. She handed the book back. Their fingers overlapped on the spine, her hand pale from years indoors, his rougher, broader, and neither of them moved for a moment longer than the exchange required. Eleanor pulled her hand back first. She did not look at her hand afterward, but she was aware of it, suddenly, in a way she had not been aware of her own body in years. The awareness was inconvenient. She filed it under the category of things to examine later, when the walls were not watching. He brought another book the following day, and another. Within a week, their meeting place had become a library, and the conversations had become the kind of intellectual exchange that Gabriel had not had since Cambridge, the kind where both parties are trying to be right, and neither is willing to be wrong, and the friction between them produces heat that has nothing to do with temperature. They talked about the law, about the Lunacy Act and its failures, the lack of retroactive review, the absence of a patient's right to appeal, the fact that the Commission could recommend release but could not compel it. They talked about the asylum system, the economics of private houses, the incentive to keep patients, £18 a quarter, multiplied by 14 patients over the years. Pemberton had earned over £800 from Eleanor's captivity alone. They talked about moral insanity, the diagnosis that existed in no medical textbook as a defined condition, but that appeared in commitment certificates with the regularity of a stamp, and they talked about other things, about the tree and its single direction of growth, about the 3-note singing and whether Mary remembered the rest of the lullaby, about Ruth, whose clear days were becoming more frequent, and whose husband had stopped paying the fees, and whose release was now a question of paperwork rather than medicine, about Eleanor's father, who had died 3 years into her commitment. "He visited once," Eleanor said. This was on the 4th day, on their usual seat, with Pemberton's attendant at her distance and the afternoon shadow falling. "Once, in 7 years, he sat in the visiting room and he looked at me through the glass and he said, "Your mother believes this is best." I said, "Do you?" He said, "I don't know what to believe, Eleanor." And then he left. He died 2 years later. Apoplexy. They told me by letter. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I read it in my room. I sat on my bed, and I held the letter, and I tried to grieve, and I could not, because the man I was grieving had sat in a chair and said, "I don't know what to believe," and walked away from his own daughter, and I was angry, and the anger was larger than the grief, and I have not been able to separate them since. Gabriel said nothing. He had learned from Alice, from the asylums, from 3 years of sitting across from women who had been put away, that some things required not a response but a witness. Eleanor did not need him to say the right thing. She needed him to hear it. "The pencil you're holding," she said. He looked down. He was holding a pencil, not writing, just holding it, the way he held Alice's watch when he was thinking. "You do that," she said. "Hold things when you're listening. The watch, the pencil, the edge of the book. You hold things the way other people nod, and you count doors." "I beg your pardon?" "When you enter a room, you look at the exits. You did it when you came into the garden, the gate, the building door, the gap where the wall meets the east wing. You did it at the library. You did it just now, when Mrs. Bridle opened the corridor. You count exits the way I count ours. Someone taught you that rooms are dangerous. My sister taught me that. Not deliberately. No, not deliberately. My sister used to say I listened with my hands. Your sister was observant? She was. She was also kind and clever and entirely sane, and she died on a floor in Surrey because a man wanted her money and the law let him take her freedom to get it. He said this without performing the grief. The grief was there, had been there for years, lived in the pocket where the watch sat. But he did not display it. He stated it, the way Eleanor stated her anger, as a fact that required no decoration. "We are having a conversation," Eleanor said, "that Dr. Pemberton's attendant is writing down in her little book. She will record it as patient displayed sustained verbal engagement with Commissioner, content focused on personal history, tone appropriate. And tomorrow Dr. Pemberton will read that note, and he will decide that my willingness to talk to you is either a sign of improvement or a sign of deterioration, depending on whether your inspection has made him nervous. If nervous, deterioration. If confident, improvement. My mental state in this building is determined not by my mind, but by Dr. Pemberton's comfort." "That is about to change," Gabriel said. "If you are still listening, if you are here in the garden with the oak tree and the 3-note singing and the woman on the bench who should never have been here at all, thank you. You stayed. And if you are new here, welcome. This is Duke of Hearts romance. We tell stories about women the world underestimated. You are in the right place. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. The next part of this story is the part where she stands up, not even close to finished. Now, back to Grey Hollow. Gabriel filed his formal report with the Lunacy Commission on the 6th day of his inspection. The report identified 5 cases at Grey Hollow House that warranted independent re-examination, Eleanor's among them. The report noted the conflict of interest in Dr. Pemberton's dual role as committing physician and asylum proprietor. It noted the single medical certificates. It noted the absence of re-examination in any of the 5 cases, and it requested the appointment of an independent physician to conduct formal evaluations under the authority of the Commission. The Commission approved the request within the week. Dr. James Marsh, a physician from Bath, who had no connection to Grey Hollow House, to Dr. Pemberton, or to any of the families involved, was appointed to conduct the examinations. He would arrive in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 21 days. Eleanor had waited years. 3 weeks should have felt like nothing. Instead, it felt like the distance between the top of the oak tree and the sky, visible, measurable, and vast. Gabriel told her on the bench. She listened. She pressed her hand flat against the wood. She didn't cry. She had stopped crying around year 2, when tears had been recorded in her file as emotional instability, and she had understood that even her grief was being used as evidence. "Who is Dr. Marsh?" she asked. "James Marsh, physician, trained at Edinburgh, published on the treatment of melancholia and the reform of patient care. He is a reformer, not a jailer." "You chose him." "I recommended him. The commission appointed him." "You chose him," she repeated, "because you need someone who will not be intimidated by Pemberton and who will not dismiss a female patient's testimony as symptomatic. You chose a reformer because a reformer is predisposed to find what you need him to find." Gabriel looked at her. "You are accusing me of stacking the examination in your favor. I am observing that you have selected the physician most likely to reach the conclusion you have already reached. This is not a criticism. It is a compliment. You are doing what I would do if I had the authority to do it. Is that a thank you? It is an acknowledgment that you are competent. I do not give those freely. Something in—" His chest moved, a direction it had not moved in years. He didn't name it. Naming it felt premature. Naming it felt dangerous. Naming it felt like reaching for something through a window that might close. He named it anyway, not out loud. In the notebook he carried, not the official inspection notebook, but the other one, the personal one, the one Alice had given him the Christmas before she was committed, the one in which he wrote things he could not say. He wrote, "She is the most intelligent person I have met in this building or any building. She is also the angriest. The intelligence and the anger are the same thing. The anger is what intelligence becomes when it has been shut away. I do not know what she will be when the anger has somewhere to go. I would like to find out." He didn't cross this out. He turned the page. Gabriel went to see Mrs. Caroline Hartley on a Tuesday. The Hartley house was in the village of Ashbrook, 8 miles from Grey Hollow, a handsome stone house with a well-kept garden and a front door painted the exact shade of green that said, "This family is respectable." Respectable enough to have a cook and a gardener, respectable enough to attend church in the second pew, respectable enough to lock away a daughter who threatened, by the simple act of being intelligent in public, to dismantle the respectability that the green door advertised. Mrs. Caroline Hartley was 52. She was thin in the way that anxious women are thin, not from lack of food, but from the constant expenditure of energy required to maintain the appearance that nothing was wrong. Her hair was brown, graying, pulled back tightly. Her hands were in her lap, and her fingers moved, picking at a thread on her sleeve, smoothing the fabric, picking again. The hands of a woman who had been performing calm and whose hands had not received the instruction. "Your Grace," she said, "this is unexpected." "I should think it was expected," Gabriel said. "I have been inspecting Grey Hollow House for 2 weeks. Your daughter is a patient there." A pause. The fingers picked, smoothed, picked. "Is she well?" The question was so ordinary that it took Gabriel a moment to recognize the weight beneath it. "Is she well?" Asked by the woman who had put her there. Asked with the tone of a woman who needed the answer to be yes, because if the answer were no, then the thing she had done, the thing she had told herself was necessary, was protective, was the only option available to a mother whose daughter was too much for the world, would become the thing it actually was, which was a crime dressed in a green door and a second pew. "She is not well," Gabriel said. "She is sane, and she is imprisoned, and she has been for 7 years. Those are not conditions that produce wellness. Mrs. Hartley's hands stopped. The picking ceased. She looked at Gabriel with an expression he had seen before, in the visiting rooms of asylums, on the faces of family members who had come to check that the door was still locked. It was the expression of a person who had built a wall between themselves and the thing they had done, and who was now watching someone walk toward the wall with a hammer. She was difficult, Mrs. Hartley said. From the time she was a girl, she argued with her tutors, with the vicar, with guests, with me. She read books that were not appropriate for a young woman. She expressed opinions that were— I cannot describe it to you, Your Grace. She frightened people. She sat at a dinner table and she dismantled a man's argument in front of his wife and his friends and his colleagues, and she did not understand, she has never understood, that being right is not the same as being safe. Being right should not require being unsafe. Perhaps not, but we do not live in the world as it should be. We live in the world as it is. And in the world as it is, a young woman who argues with men at dinner tables does not receive proposals. She receives diagnoses. Gabriel said nothing. He let the silence do its work. The clock on the mantel ticked. The garden was visible through the window, orderly, trimmed, the shrubs cut to uniform height, and he thought of Grey Hollow's garden and the hedges that were expected to conform, and the oak that had grown upward, because upward was the only direction available. "You signed the commitment order," he said. "Yes." "On the basis of a single medical certificate from the physician who owned the asylum. Dr. Pemberton was recommended. He was a proper doctor. He examined her. For 11 minutes. I didn't count the minutes. Eleanor did." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped on a still floor. Eleanor, not your daughter, not the patient. Eleanor. Mrs. Hartley's hands resumed their picking. "She has been in that room for 7 years, Gabriel said. "She entered at 18. She is 25. She has lost the years in which she might have been educated, married, traveled, worked, lived. She has read every book available to her. She has memorized the admissions ledger. She has taught herself law by reading Dr. Pemberton's case files through a window he does not know can be opened. She is the most articulate person I have met in 3 years of asylum inspections, and she is sitting on a bench under an oak tree, watching her life happen without her because you were afraid of what she was." Mrs. Hartley's chin lifted, not in defiance, in something more complicated, the posture of someone preparing to say something she had carried since the signing and had never said aloud. "I was afraid of what would happen to her," she said. "Not of what she was, of what would happen. I have always known, that Eleanor was exceptional. Exceptional daughters do not survive in the world we gave them. Exceptional sons are celebrated. Exceptional daughters are punished. I watched her argue at that dinner table, and I saw the rest of her life. The proposals that would never come, the invitations that would stop, the whispers that had already started, the word unnatural that was already being used by the women I called friends. And I thought, if she continues, they will destroy her. Not the asylum, them, the village, the society, the world that does not want clever women and punishes the ones it finds. I thought, God forgive me, I thought, at least in Grey Hollow she would be safe. She is not safe. She is contained. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. Did you know it then?" The silence stretched. The clock ticked. "I think I knew it then," Mrs. Hartley said. "I think I knew it when I signed. And I signed anyway, because the alternative, letting her be herself in a world that would break her for it, was more frightening to me than a locked room I could control, the world I could not." Gabriel stood. He placed his card on the table. "Dr. James Marsh will conduct a formal examination of your daughter in 3 weeks. He is independent, he is thorough, and he will determine whether Eleanor's commitment was medically justified. If it was not, and I do not believe it was, she will be released." Mrs. Hartley looked at the card, at the name, at the crest. "Will she forgive me?" she asked. "I don't know. That is Eleanor's to decide. My concern is the door. The door should never have been locked. I intend to open it." He left. The green door closed behind him. The garden was quiet. The shrubs were trimmed. And inside the house a woman sat alone with her hands in her lap, and the thread on her sleeve nearly pulled through, and the knowledge, held since the signing, carried like a stone, never spoken until today, that what she had done to protect her daughter was the thing that had destroyed her. The 3 weeks passed. Eleanor spent them the way she had spent every week at Grey Hollow, in the routine that had become her architecture, the structure she had built inside the structure that held her. She rose at 6. She washed in cold water. She ate porridge at 5:30. She walked in the garden at 9. She read the books Gabriel brought, the pencil Mrs. Gill provided, the margins that filled with her handwriting until the pages held more of Eleanor than Martineau. She sat with Ruth. She counted the sparrows. She listened to Mary's 3 notes. She pressed her hand against things that were solid, but something had shifted. The routine was the same, but the woman inside it was not. For years, Eleanor had lived in the indefinite. No date, no hearing, no end point, just the ongoing present tense of captivity. Now there was a date, the 18th of October. Dr. Marsh would arrive, and she would sit across from him, and he would ask her questions, and she would answer them, and a man she had never met would hold in his hands the rest of her life. She was terrified. She didn't say. "This," she said it to Ruth once at night, through the wall that separated their rooms, in the hour between lights out and sleep, when the asylum was quiet enough to hear the mice in the walls and the owl outside and the breathing of 14 women in 14 rooms, and the quality of silence that means someone on the other side of a wall is listening. "What if he doesn't believe me?" Eleanor said. "He will," Ruth said. "You don't know that." "I know what I know. I know that I have been in this place for 4 years, and I have met women who are ill, and women who are grieving, and women who are broken, and women who are lost. And I have met one woman who is none of those things. You are the one who is none of those things, Eleanor. Dr. Marsh will see it. Anyone with eyes would see it. The reason you have been here for 7 years is not that no one can see it. It is that no one with the authority to open the door has bothered to look. The Duke looked. The Duke looked. That is why you are going to leave this place, not because you are sane. You have always been sane, but because someone with a key finally noticed." Eleanor pressed her hand against the wall. On the other side, Ruth pressed hers. The wall was cold. The hands were warm. The wall remained. "When I leave," Eleanor said, "I will not forget you." "I know," Ruth said. "You are not the kind who forgets." Gabriel came every day. He brought books. He brought newspapers. The Times, 2 weeks old, because the delivery to Grey Hollow was irregular, and because Eleanor consumed news the way fire consumed paper. Completely, rapidly, and with an appetite that couldn't be satisfied by the available supply. He brought once an orange, out of season, expensive, obtained from a greengrocer in Salisbury, who could not understand why a duke was purchasing a single piece of fruit at 9 in the morning with the urgency of a military operation. Eleanor peeled the orange in the garden. She divided it into segments. She gave one to Ruth. She ate the rest in silence, with concentrated attention. She hadn't tasted an orange since she came here and was experiencing each segment as a discrete event. The spray of juice, the tang, the texture of the membrane, the sweetness of a thing that had grown in sunlight on a tree in a place where doors were not locked. "Thank you," she said. She did not look at him when she said it. She looked at the orange peel in her hands. "You are welcome. I mean for all of it, the books, the commission, the examination, the orange." She paused. "Especially the orange?" "Why especially the orange?" "Because the books are a professional courtesy. The commission is your duty. The examination is a legal procedure. The orange is none of those things. The orange is a man walking into a shop and thinking of a woman in a garden who has not tasted fruit in 7 years and deciding that this is a thing he can fix. The orange is personal. The rest is institutional." Gabriel looked at her, at the orange peel, at the thin wrists, at her teeth visible because she was almost smiling, and the almost was, he understood now, the most she allowed herself in a place where even joy was surveilled. "The rest is personal, too," he said. "I have not been honest about that." "I know," she said. "You hold the watch when you talk to me. You hold it the way I press my hand against the bench. We are both reaching for something solid. The difference is that my solid thing is made of wood, and yours is made of a dead woman's time." He did not deny this. He could not. She had seen it, the way she saw everything, with the focus of someone who had spent years with nothing to do but observe, and who had turned observation into a discipline so refined it bordered on the unfair. "When this is over," he said, "when the examination is done and the door is open and you are standing on the other side of it, I would like to continue this conversation, not in a garden with an attendant writing in a book, in a room where you are free, where the door is open because you choose to leave it open, not because someone has unlocked it for you." Eleanor held the orange peel. She turned it in her hands. "You are proposing something," she said. "I am proposing a conversation. The proposal comes later, when you have had time to remember what it feels like to choose things. That is the most careful sentence anyone has ever said to me. I am a careful man. I know. You carry a dead woman's watch, and you are always 4 minutes late, and you bring oranges to asylums. You are careful, and you are kind, and you are angry about the same things I am angry about, and I cannot, I will not, respond to that from inside this place, because anything I feel here is contaminated by the fact that you are the man with the key. And I need to know, when I feel it, that I am feeling it as a free woman, not as a prisoner who is grateful." "I understand." "Good. Now ask me what I thought of Martineau's chapter on education." He did. And they talked about education for 40 minutes, and the attendant wrote in her book, and the oak threw its shadow, and the orange peel dried on the bench between them like a small, bright, improbable thing. The 18th of October was a Wednesday. It rained. Eleanor woke before the key turned. She had not slept, not properly, not the heavy institutional sleep that the body learns to perform in captivity as a form of self-defense. She had lain in the dark and listened to the rain on the roof, and the owl in the oak tree, and Ruth breathing through the wall, and she had thought, Today a man I have never met will sit across from me, and I will open my mouth, and the rest of my life will depend on what comes out." She washed, she dressed, the gray cotton, the cord in her hair. She looked at her reflection in the small square mirror on the washstand, the only mirror in the room, 6 inches across, spotted with age, offering a face in fragments, light blue eyes, the widow's peak, the gap between her teeth, the face of the girl who had entered this room at 18 and was leaving it, if she left it, at 25, and who could see, in the mirror's spotted surface, both the girl and the woman and the years between them like a road that had been walked in one room. Mrs. Bridle brought breakfast at 6:30. Porridge. Eleanor did not eat it. She sat on her bed with her hands flat on the mattress, and she pressed. At 9 o'clock, Mrs. Bridle returned with the key. "The doctor is ready for you." Eleanor stood. She walked the corridor she had walked 7,000 times. She counted the steps, 47 from her room to the common room, and she thought, "I count everything, steps, sparrows, days, angles of light. I have turned counting into a way of holding the world still. That is either a discipline or a symptom." She did not believe it was a symptom. She believed in patterns. The common room at Grey Hollow was the largest room in the building, used for meals, for supervised recreation, for the occasional family visit conducted through glass. Today it had been rearranged. A table at one end, 3 chairs behind it, 1 chair in front. The arrangement was deliberate. The single chair facing the panel, the distance between them calibrated to establish authority on one side and submission on the other. Eleanor looked at the single chair and thought, "This is a courtroom without a judge. This is a trial without a jury. This is the moment where the rest of my life is decided by furniture." Dr. James Marsh sat in the center. He wasn't what she had expected, not old, not severe, not the white-whiskered patriarch of judicial authority. He was perhaps 45, lean, with spectacles and ink stains on his fingers, and the posture of a man who spent more time at a desk than on his feet. His eyes were brown, and they were... Eleanor assessed this in the 3 seconds between entering the room and sitting down. Curious. Not suspicious, not sympathetic. Curious. The eyes of a man who had come to find something and who was open to finding it. Beside him, a clerk with a pen and a ledger. On his other side, Dr. Pemberton, whose smile had become fixed in the way that smiles become fixed when they are load-bearing and the load has become unsustainable. Gabriel was in the room, not at the table, in a chair against the wall, in his capacity as commissioner. He held Alice's watch. He didn't look at Eleanor. He looked at the window, which was open, because he had opened it, because he believed that examinations conducted in closed rooms produced closed results. He had counted the exits when he entered. 2. The door and the window he always counted. Eleanor sat. "Miss Hartley," Dr. Marsh said, "thank you for agreeing to this examination." "I was not asked, I was brought, but I appreciate the courtesy of pretending I had a choice." Dr. Marsh looked at her. A pause. Then, very slightly, one corner of his mouth moved. The movement was so small it might not have been a smile, but it was. "I should like to begin with some questions," he said. "Straightforward at first. They may become less so." "I understand." "Can you tell me the current date?" "The 18th of October, 1845. A Wednesday. It is raining. The rain began at approximately 4 in the morning, which I know because the guttering on the east side of this building leaks, and the dripping changed pitch when the rain increased. I have been listening to that gutter for 7 years. I can tell you the time within 20 minutes by the sound it makes. Dr. Marsh wrote something. Can you tell me the name of the current Prime Minister?" "Sir Robert Peel. He has held the office since 1841. He is likely to lose it within the year over the Corn Laws, which he supports repealing, which will split the Conservative Party and which is, in my opinion, the correct policy pursued by the wrong man for the wrong reasons. But the corn will not care about the politics of the man who frees it." Pemberton shifted in his chair. Dr. Marsh wrote, "Can you tell me the year of the Battle of Waterloo?" 1815, the 18th of June, a Sunday. Napoleon surrendered to Captain Maitland of HMS Bellerophon on the 15th of July. The question you are actually asking is whether I am oriented in time and place and history. I am. I have been oriented every day of the 7 years I have spent in this room. The disorientation in my case is not mine. It belongs to the system that put me here. Miss Hartley, Dr. Marsh said, and his voice carried something that had not been there at the start, not admiration, but recognition. The recognition of a man who had sat across from hundreds of patients and who was now sitting across from someone who was not one. I am going to ask you some questions that are more personal. I would appreciate honest answers. I have given nothing but honest answers for 7 years. Honesty has been, as your colleague Dr. Pemberton can confirm, one of my primary symptoms. Why were you committed to this asylum? I was committed because I argued with a man named Mr. Edmund Cross at a dinner party hosted by my parents on the 11th of March, 1838. Mr. Cross, who was a solicitor and a guest of my father's, stated that women were incapable of sustained rational thought. I disagreed. I cited Mary Wollstonecraft, the writings of Harriet Martineau, and the mathematical work of Mary Somerville, who had been elected to the Royal Astronomical Society 3 years earlier. Mr. Cross did not respond to my evidence. He turned to my mother and said, "You should have this one looked at." My mother took his advice. She called Dr. Pemberton. Dr. Pemberton examined me for 11 minutes. He signed a certificate diagnosing moral insanity. My mother signed the commitment order. I was brought here the following morning. I was 18 years old. I have been here for 7 years, 7 months, and 4 days. The evidence for my insanity was a dinner party. The evidence against it is this conversation. The room was silent. The clerk's pen had stopped. Pemberton's smile had reached the limit of its structural capacity and was beginning to show cracks. Dr. Marsh removed his spectacles. He cleaned them. He replaced them. This took approximately 8 seconds, during which the only sound was the rain on the window and the breathing of 5 people and the scratch of Gabriel's fingernail against Alice's watch. "Miss Hartley," Dr. Marsh said, "I should like to ask you one more question. It is not a medical question. It is not a legal question. It is a question I ask because I believe the answer matters. Ask. What would you do if you were released?" Eleanor looked at him. At the spectacles and the ink stains and the curious brown eyes. She looked at the table, which held her file. The file she had memorized through a window. The file that contained her entire captivity, reduced to clinical notations and quarterly reports, and the word argumentative appearing 43 times. She looked at the window, which was open, which Gabriel had opened, through which she could see the garden, the bench, the oak, the sky, the ordinary, enormous, available sky that she had watched through a crack in a shutter since she was 18, and that was, this morning, gray with rain, and more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. "I would read," she said. "I would read everything I have missed. 7 years of books and newspapers and journals and arguments and ideas that have happened without me. I would walk, not in a rectangle, not on gravel, not under supervision. I would walk in a straight line in any direction I chose for as long as I chose, and I would stop when I wanted to stop. Not when an attendant told me the hour was finished. I would eat an orange. I have recently been reminded what an orange tastes like, and I would like to eat another one without wondering whether the man who brought it was trying to assess my response to citrus." She paused. The gap between her teeth was visible. She was not smiling, but she was close. Close in the way she allowed herself to be close, which was to say, approaching the border of the expression without crossing it, because crossing it in this room in this examination would either be recorded as appropriate affect or manic elevation, depending on which doctor was watching. She crossed it. She smiled. The gap showed. Her eyes held the rain light from the window. "And I would argue," she said, "I would argue with anyone who would listen about the Corn Laws and the asylum system and the education of women and the treatment of the poor and the proper attribution of mathematical discoveries and the quality of sermons in country churches. I would argue because arguing is not a symptom. It is a function of a mind that is working. I have been told for 7 years that my mind is the problem. My mind is not the problem. My mind is the only thing that has kept me alive in this room. And if I leave, when I leave, I intend to use it, loudly, in public, at dinner parties, with anyone who tells me that women cannot reason. Because I can, I have, and I am doing it now." She sat back. She folded her hands. The room held its breath. Dr. Marsh looked at his notes. He looked at Pemberton. He looked at Gabriel. He looked at Eleanor. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I have been a physician for 22 years. I have examined patients in public asylums and private houses and county institutions across 6 counties. I have seen madness. I have seen grief. I have seen women broken by the system that was supposed to care for them. I have never, in 22 years, conducted an examination in which the patient's sanity was less in doubt." He placed his pen on the table. "It is the finding of this examination that Miss Eleanor Hartley is, and in my professional opinion has always been, of sound mind. The original commitment was conducted under a single medical certificate by a physician with a material interest in the patient's continued detention without independent confirmation and on the basis of symptoms that do not constitute a recognized or defensible diagnosis. I am recommending her immediate release." Pemberton opened his mouth. "Dr. Marsh, I must protest. You must do no such thing, Dr. Pemberton. You must open the door." The room was quiet. The rain continued. The clock wrote. Gabriel held the watch. Eleanor did not move. She sat in the single chair with her hands folded and her back straight, and the light from the open window falling across her face, and she breathed. Just breathed. The way a person breathes when they have been holding something for years, that the act of releasing it feels less like relief and more like a second kind of drowning. The good kind, the kind where the water is warm and the surface is close and the air is waiting. She flattened her hands against her knees. She pressed until she could feel the bone beneath the gray cotton. Solid, real, hers. "Thank you," she said, to Dr. Marsh, to the clerk, to the room, to the open window and the rain, and the garden visible through it. She did not look at Gabriel. Not yet. She would, later. But in this moment, the looking was hers. The first free thing she had done was to choose where her eyes went, and she chose the window, and the sky, and the rain that was falling on the garden where she had waited for someone to notice that she was not the diagnosis in the file, but the woman behind it. She stood. She walked to the window. She put her hand on the sill, the cold stone, the rain mist, the ivy that the sparrows lived in. She breathed the air. It smelled of October, of wet earth, of the oak tree, of the world. The door behind her was open. Not because she had opened it. Not yet. Soon she would open her own doors, but this one, this first one, had been opened by a man with a slow watch and a notebook full of things he could not say, and an orange he had carried into a garden because he had thought of her and could not stop. Gabriel's carriage took them to Ashbrook, to the house where the papers had been signed. Eleanor sat in the carriage and looked out the window at the road she had not seen since the carriage brought her here, the hedgerows and the fields and the sheep and the stone walls and the village church and the sky, The sky that was so large and so gray and so available that it made her chest hurt with the enormity of what had been taken from her and what was now, impossibly, being returned. She didn't speak. Gabriel didn't speak. The silence between them was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of two people who understood that some distances, the distance between an asylum and a front door, between a locked room and a life, required something other than words. The carriage stopped. The green door was ahead. The garden was neat. The shrubs were trimmed. The house looked exactly as it had looked 7 years ago because the house had not changed. The woman inside it had. The woman outside it had. "I'll wait," Gabriel said. Eleanor looked at him, at the broad face, the square jaw, the warm brown eyes, at the watch in his waistcoat pocket, at the man who had sat on a bench and looked at her and seen not a diagnosis, not a case file, not a pattern, but a person. "Thank you," she said, "for the door." "You opened it yourself. I just showed you where it was." "That is not accurate. You filed a report, appointed a physician, challenged a proprietor, argued with a commission, and carried an orange into a garden. You did not just anything." "The orange was the most important part." "I know," she said. "That's what I said." She got out of the carriage. She walked to the green door. She didn't knock. She opened it because it was not locked, because front doors are not locked in the way that asylum doors are locked, and the difference between the two, the difference between a door that opens from the inside and a door that opens only from the outside, was the difference between a life and a sentence. Her mother was in the parlor. The same chair, the same thread-picked sleeve. Mrs. Caroline Hartley looked up at her daughter, and her face held everything, years of guilt and fear and the agony of a woman who had done a terrible thing for what she believed were good reasons, and who had spent every day since then living inside the knowledge that the reasons were not good enough. "Eleanor," she said. "Mother." The room was quiet. The clock ticked. The door was behind her, open. "I am not here to punish you," Eleanor said. "I have spent 7 years in a room with nothing to do but think, and I have thought about this conversation every day of those years. I have rehearsed it in the dark. I have shouted it at walls. I have whispered it to sparrows. I have written it on scraps of paper and torn the paper up and written it again. And what I have arrived at, after years of revision, is this." She looked at her mother. At the thin hands, at the thread, at the face that held fear and guilt and love. Because the love was there, Eleanor could see it, had always been able to see it, even through the glass of the visiting room on the day her father had come and sat and said, "I don't know what to believe," and left. The love was there. The love was not the problem. The problem was that the love had been shaped by fear into something that locked doors instead of opening them. "I remember the morning they came," Eleanor said. "I remember the carriage. I remember that you were standing in the hallway and you were wearing the blue dress with the lace collar, and you did not look at me. They took me out the front door and I turned, and you were standing in the hallway and you were looking at the wall, not at me. At the wall, and I have carried that, the wall, the blue dress, the not looking, for 7 years. It is heavier than anything they did to me in that room." Mrs. Hartley's hands were still. The thread had been pulled through. The fabric was ruined. She didn't notice. "I know why you did it," Eleanor said. "You were afraid, not of me, of what the world would do to me. You saw a daughter who would not be silent, and you saw a world that punishes women who are not silent, and you chose the punishment you could control over the punishment you could not. I understand this. I do not agree with it, but I understand it. She stepped forward. She was taller than her mother. She had always been taller. She had been taller at 18 when they took her, and she was taller now, and the height was a thing she no longer apologized for. "I forgive you," she said, "because carrying this anger is heavier than the room, and I am done carrying things that belong to other people. The guilt is yours. The 7 years are mine. I will not give you the anger, too." Mrs. Hartley was crying, silently, the way women in parlors cry, without sound, without theater, the tears falling on the ruined sleeve in the quiet room, with the clock and the green door and the daughter she had put away standing in front of her, free and furious and forgiving. "But I will not come back to this house," Eleanor said. "This is the room where you signed the papers. This is the hallway where you looked at the wall. I cannot live inside these walls. I will not be contained again by a room, by a house, by a family, by a door that someone else controls." She turned. She walked through the hallway. She passed the place where her mother had stood in the blue dress and looked at the wall. She opened the front door, the respectable door, the one that said this family is proper and decent and well kept, and does not have daughters who argue at dinner parties because the daughter who argued is in a room 8 miles away, being quiet for the first time in her life. She walked through, into the October air, into the rain, which had not stopped, into the world, which was large and gray and wet and free. Gabriel was beside the carriage, holding the watch. A man keeping his sister's time because letting it go was worse than being late. "Where would you like to go?" he said. Eleanor looked at the road. The road went in both directions. For 7 years she had walked in rectangles. The road went in both directions, and she could choose. "Somewhere with a library," she said. "I have one." "How many volumes?" "Last count, 11,000. But I have not been home in 3 weeks, so the number may have changed." 11,000, at my reading pace, which is approximately 1 volume per day when unrestricted. That will take me 30 years. "Then you had better start." She looked at him, at the broad face, the warm brown eyes, the watch pocket. The man who had walked into a garden with an Orange and a Lunacy Commission appointment and had seen, through 2 panes of glass and 30 feet of gravel, a woman who was not a file but a person. She almost smiled. Then she did smile. The full one, the gap visible, the light blue eyes holding the rain and the road and the 30 years of reading, and the man who was 4 minutes late to everything, and who had, for the first time in 3 years, arrived exactly when he was needed. "Gabriel," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. "Eleanor," he said. It wasn't the first time he had used hers, but it was the first time he had said it to a free woman, and the difference, in weight, in warmth, in the way the words sounded in open air instead of in a garden bounded by walls, was everything. They stood in the rain. They did not touch. That would come later, in the library, over books, in the margins where she wrote and the notebooks where he wrote, in the slow, careful process of 2 people who had both been damaged by locked doors, learning that open doors required a different kind of courage, the courage to stay when you could leave, the courage to choose when you had spent years being chosen for, the courage to love someone not because they held the key, but because they had handed it to you and stepped back and said, "This is yours now." But that is a story for another time. The library came first. The 30 years came first. The reading and the arguing and the walking in straight lines in any direction she chose came first. The first book she read at Westmere was not Martineau or Wollstonecraft or any of the texts she had discussed with Gabriel on the bench. It was a novel, Frankenstein, by Mary Shelley. Eleanor read it in one sitting, in the library, in a chair by the window with the door open, Open because she had left it open, because at Westmere every door she encountered was open, and if it was not, she opened it herself and left it that way. She read about a creature made and then rejected by the person who made it. She set the book down. She did not pick it up again. The creature was someone else's story. Eleanor had her own. Ruth was released 3 weeks after Eleanor. Her husband's fees had stopped. The paperwork was completed. Gabriel arranged a position for her, companion to an elderly widow in Bath, a woman who needed quiet company and who didn't require explanations. Eleanor went back for it. She stood at the gate of Grey Hollow House on a November morning and waited while Ruth walked out, slowly, the way people walk when they have forgotten that roads go in more than one direction. Ruth stopped at the gate. She looked at Eleanor. She looked at the road. She looked at the sky, which was the same sky she had seen from the garden, but which was, from this side, of the wall, a different sky entirely. "I don't know which way to go," Ruth said. "Left," Eleanor said. "The coach to Bath is left." Ruth turned left. She took 3 steps. She stopped. She came back and she put her arms around Eleanor, and she held on, not the way patients held each other in the common room, which was the grip of people sharing a raft, but the way 2 women hold each other when one of them has said through a wall in the dark, "You are the one who is none of those things," and the other has never forgotten it. "I'll write," Ruth said. "Every month." Every month. She walked left. Eleanor watched her until the road curved and she was gone. The letters came every month. They were short, practical, and always ended with the same line. "I am having a clear day." The line meant more than anyone who had not lived through the dark ones could understand. Mary was not released. Mary's family had died. Mary's fees were paid from a trust that had no mechanism for review. Mary continued to sing the 3 notes, the opening of a lullaby she could not remember the rest of. And Eleanor, before she left Grey Hollow, sat with Mary in the common room and sang the next 3 notes. She did not know if they were the right notes. Mary looked at her, and for one moment the loop broke, and Mary sang 6 notes. The loop widened for a moment. And then the loop closed again, and Eleanor carried those 6 notes out of the building and into the carriage and into the rest of her life. Dr. Pemberton's license was reviewed by the commission. He was not shut down. The wheels of reform turned slowly, and Pemberton's asylum was the clean kind. And the clean kind was harder to close than the other kind because the cruelty was administrative, not physical, and administrative cruelty didn't photograph well in the newspapers. But the review was placed on record. The 5 single certificate cases were flagged. 3 of the 5 women were re-examined. 2 were released. 1 remained, genuinely ill, properly diagnosed, the exception that the system used to justify itself. Mrs. Caroline Hartley sold the house in Ashbrook the following year. She moved to a cottage near her sister in Devon. She did not visit Eleanor. Eleanor didn't invite her. They wrote, occasionally, short letters, careful letters, the letters of 2 women who loved each other and who understood that love wasn't sufficient to undo what had been done, but who also understood that silence was the other cruelty, the one that happened after the door was opened, and neither of them was willing to perform it. Eleanor didn't marry Gabriel immediately. She spent 6 months in his library. She read, she argued, she wrote. Not in margins, but on full pages, in complete sentences, in her own hand. She published an essay in the Westminster Review on the commitment of women to private asylums under single medical certificates. The essay cited 14 cases. It cited the law. It cited Mary Wollstonecraft and Harriet Martineau and the mathematical work of Mary Somerville. And it cited a dinner party in 1838 at which a woman had argued with a man about whether women could reason, and the man had said they could not. and the woman had spent 7 years in a room for the crime of proving that they could. The essay was published under her own name, Eleanor Hartley, not a pseudonym, not a man's name, hers. Gabriel proposed on a Tuesday, in the library. He had written it in his notebook. 41 attempts, not 47, because he had learned by the 37th attempt that the correct phrasing wasn't a phrasing at all, but a question. "Would you like to stay?" She said, "I have been staying for 6 months." He said, "I mean permanently." She said, "Define permanently." He said, "Until the books run out." She said, 11,000 volumes, at 1 per day, that is 30 years. He said, "I plan to buy more." She said, "Yes," not with the word, with the smile, the full one, the gap visible, the light blue eyes holding the library light and the man and the open door and the 30 years and the knowledge carried like an orange in an open hand that she had chosen this. Not because she was grateful, not because he had a key, because he had handed her the key and stepped back and she had used it, and then she had stayed. Not in a room, in a life. One she had chosen, for the first time, herself. Epilogue. And that is the story of the woman they called insane, the woman who argued at dinner parties, who read books her mother said were dangerous, who cited evidence in a world that did not want women to have evidence, and who spent 7 years in a room for the crime of being right. The asylum system Eleanor fought against did not end with her essay. It did not end with the Lunacy Act of 1845. It continued, reformed, reshaped, renamed, but continuing, because the impulse to lock away women who do not conform is not a law that can be repealed. It is a habit, and habits take longer to die than laws. But Eleanor argued, she questioned, she was not insane, and every woman who has ever been told she is too much, too loud, too clever, too difficult, every woman who has been told to sit down, be quiet, stop reading, stop thinking, stop asking, carries a piece of what Eleanor carried out of that room, the knowledge that the diagnosis was never about her mind, it was about their fear. And the door is open now. Open because a man with a pocket watch walked into a garden and looked at a woman on a bench and saw what years of doctors and attendants and quarterly reports had failed to see. A person, not a file, not a case, not a diagnosis, a person with light blue eyes and a gap between her teeth and an opinion about Martineau, and a preference for oranges, and a mind that had survived years of silence by refusing absolutely and permanently to be silent. The sparrows are still in the ivy. The oak tree is still growing upward. The 3 notes are still being sung, somewhere, by someone who cannot remember the rest. But Eleanor remembers. She remembers all of it, and she will not be quiet about it. Thank you for being here tonight. Every listen, every comment, every subscription builds this place, and this place is for the women who were told they were too much, the ones who argued, the ones who questioned, the ones who were not insane, who were never insane, who were locked away for the crime of having a mind and using it. If this stayed with you, tell me where it landed. Was it the key turning at 6 in the morning, the 11-minute examination, the 3-note singing, the orange in the garden, Ruth's hand through the wall, the mother who looked at the wall, the gap between her teeth? Or was it the library with 11,000 volumes and a door she left open? Drop it below. I read every one. And if you haven't subscribed, the next story is already growing in a locked room where a woman was told she was too much. She opened her mouth anyway. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, arguing is not a symptom. It is a sign that a mind is working, and a mind that works is not a thing to fear. It is a thing to free. Good night. I'll see you in the next one.